In an empath's life, there are moments that seem small, yet they mark turning points from which there is no return. They are not loud, nor dramatic, but arrive in silence when the heart suddenly realizes that something has drifted off the axis of truth. Carl Jung called such moments thresholds of the soul, where the self is tested to see whether you still belong to yourself or have become someone else's reflection. For an empath, this is no ordinary trial. It is a journey through the architecture of inner darkness, because when you are born with the gift of deep sensitivity, the worlds of others easily blend into yours. You understand them, you feel for them, and at times you even live on their behalf. But eventually, that very gift begins to betray you. You realize you have listened too much, endured too long, and loved without remembering why. That is the first tremor of the soul when kindness ceases to be light and becomes a chain. These fatal moments are not meant to destroy you. They are meant to pull you out of the illusion that empathy equals salvation, that love alone can transform everything. They force you to look back at the roles you once played just to be accepted, at the places where you lost yourself to maintain a false peace. And as each mask falls away, you come face to face with the most frightening thing of all, your own emptiness. Yet within that emptiness, Jung said, lies the seed of the true self waiting to be born. These moments are gateways to awakening a process of shedding every false assumption about love, morality, and goodness. When you pass through them, you no longer empathize out of fear, need, or the desire to be seen, but out of the wisdom that comes from knowing human limits. That is when compassion becomes intelligence, when you can love without losing yourself, help without losing your peace, and connect without dissolving your essence. The 5 fatal moments in an empath's life are, in truth, 5 times the soul must choose: to remain trapped in the emotional storms of others, or to step onto the threshold of awareness where kindness is no longer a reflex, but a sovereign choice. Moment 1. The awakening shock. When the soul says enough, the awakening shock of an empath is not loud. It doesn't arrive through a grand tragedy, but through something small, a cold glance, a detached sentence, a silence that suddenly tells you something in this relationship has died. Jung called this the first threshold of the soul, the point where intuition finally forces you to see what you've been avoiding all along. For so long, you've lived by feeling, sensing energy, understanding others' moods, believing that your empathy could keep everything in harmony. But then the moment comes when you realize a painful truth. You can understand others, but you cannot make them understand you. Your empathy is not reciprocated, it is taken for granted. And in that instant, your soul whispers, enough. This is the first tremor in the empath's journey, when kindness has been drained to emptiness, when your intuition screams that something is wrong, yet your mind keeps defending. They didn't mean it, I'm just too sensitive. That denial pulls you further away from your true center. Jung called this the betrayal of intuition, when one chooses illusion over truth. And then there comes a moment when denial can no longer hold. A small detail, a disappointment, a revealed lie, and you realize you've seen it long ago, but lacked the courage to believe it. The shock doesn't come from the other person, it comes from within, from admitting that you chose blindness just to keep loving. Jung described this as the unbearable knowing, the moment you cannot unsee. It hurts not only because it exposes another, but because it exposes you. The part of you that believed love could change everything, that if you were kind enough, people wouldn't hurt you. But now the naked truth appears. Some people cannot give what they've never had, and kindness without boundaries becomes an open invitation for abuse. Your first reaction is self-blame. You think you weren't patient enough, loving enough, capable enough to make them understand. Then you withdraw, you doubt everyone, and begin to believe that sincerity no longer exists in this world. But if you are brave enough to stop, to simply face the pain without excuses or escape, you will begin to understand what Jung called the birth of consciousness. It is the moment a human sees both light and shadow within themselves and does not look away. The awakening shock is not another's betrayal. It is your first encounter with your own shadow. You realize your kindness was never entirely pure. It carried fear of abandonment, the need for recognition, and the compulsion to heal others in order to feel worthy. When you see this, compassion begins to transform into wisdom. You understand that helping others does not mean losing yourself, and that love is not meant to be endured. Jung called this phase nigredo, the blackening stage, in the alchemy of the soul. Every illusion burns away, leaving only what is real. There you begin to learn a vital skill, conscious discernment. You no longer read others to rescue them, but to see whether they share the same emotional depth as you. You know how to withdraw your energy from barren ground and stop planting seeds where nothing will bloom. This shock is not meant to make you lose faith in others, but to teach you how to trust yourself, your intuition, the signals in your body, that quiet vibration within when something feels off. As Jung said, the soul knows long before the mind understands. And when you start listening to your soul instead of your logic, everything around you begins to change. After this shock, the empath is no longer the same. They become calmer, quieter, but their eyes shine brighter. They no longer prove their worth through endless giving, but through their ability to remain peaceful amidst chaos. They understand that silence can be the deepest answer, and that boundaries are not cruelty, they are the soul's way of preserving itself so it can keep loving. The awakening shock is the first initiation the universe grants to every empath. It is an invitation to step down from the role of savior and rise as the awakened. And when you dare to cross that threshold, you finally understand. Real death is not when love ends, but when you stop trusting your own intuition. Once you reclaim that trust, you no longer fear losing anyone because you found the one person you had long abandoned, yourself. Moment 2, the dissolution of the self, when you no longer know who you are. After the first awakening shock, the empath often enters the second and more dangerous stage, Jung called the dissolution of self. It doesn't come because you were hurt, but because after years of living to meet others' expectations, you gradually lose sight of where you end, and your roles begin. This is no longer external pain, it is an inner collapse. At this stage, the empath is no longer angry or resistant. They simply feel empty. Everything that once sparked interest now feels dull and meaningless. When someone asks, "What do you really want?" you hesitate. You don't know how to answer. In your lifelong effort to please the world, you have lost your inner compass, the one that once guided your emotions, desires, and joy for living. Jung called this the trap of the persona, the mask we create to adapt to society. For empaths, this mask is thicker, subtler, and far more dangerous because it takes the shape of kindness. You become the good listener, the one who understands, the one who carries the weight for everyone else. You become perfect in the eyes of others, and in doing so, you disappear in your own. When you live too long in those roles, you begin to believe they are who you are. You no longer remember the last time you said no, or what it felt like to be honest with yourself. You nod out of habit, smile when you want to cry, apologize even when you did nothing wrong, and give as if it were a duty. Kindness turns into a survival mechanism, no longer a conscious choice, but an instinct to stay safe in a world of expectations. Then one day, your body starts to rebel. You feel tired for no reason, anxious without cause, tearful, unfocused. Your mind feels foggy, as if wrapped in mist. These are signs of inner disintegration, when the soul can no longer endure prolonged inauthenticity. Jung called this ego fatigue, the exhaustion that comes from maintaining too many identities at once. The irony is that the empath believes they are loving, but in truth, they are performing love. Because if you respond only to others' needs while losing touch with your own, that love is no longer alive, it becomes mechanical. And when every act becomes mechanical, the soul begins to separate from the body. You exist, but you no longer feel alive. This moment is, in fact, the soul's cry, "Remember me." Jung believed a person truly exists only when they can sense their individual self. When that connection is lost, one falls into what he called psychic disintegration, the fragmentation of the soul. It's the moment you look in the mirror and see a stranger staring back, For empaths, this is especially terrifying, because they once defined themselves by knowing what others need. Now, when there's no one left to serve, they feel meaningless. Many try to fill this void with work, volunteering, or finding someone new to heal. But each attempt only sinks them deeper into the same illusion, that their worth comes from being useful. Jung wrote, "The most dangerous lie is when we are honest with others but deceitful to ourselves." This defines the essence of this phase, when the soul begins to rebel against the performance. You can no longer bear to be the agreeable one, the reasonable one, the always okay one. The masks that once earned you love now feel like chains. And when you start removing them, the world reacts. Those who are used to receiving from you won't accept it easily when you stop giving. They'll say you've changed, that you've become selfish, cold. But in truth, this is the first time you've ever been real. Jung called this enantiodromia, when something pushed to its extreme transforms into its opposite. After too much compliance, you crave freedom. After dissolving too deeply, you need to assert yourself with fierce clarity. It's here that you risk losing balance. Some empaths, after the collapse, swing to the opposite extreme, becoming hardened, closed off, unwilling to trust anyone. Jung warned that this is only the shadow opposite of submission, still unconscious, merely inverted. You are not yet yourself. You are only reacting to pain. The only way through this moment is by entering what Jung called active imagination for self-recovery, a conscious rebirth. Instead of running or rebelling, you begin to converse with your own soul, not with poetic words, but with simple, raw questions. What do I truly want? What makes me feel alive? Who am I trying to please? You listen to the answers, rough, uncomfortable, but honest. This is the process of learning to hear your own voice amidst all the noise. At first, it's faint, a whisper drowned out by old habits of pleasing others. But if you stay patient, it grows stronger. You begin to enjoy solitude. You no longer feel the need to explain everything. You start saying no without guilt, and in that moment, you experience what Jung called the return of the soul. The dissolution of the self is not failure. It is the opportunity to rebuild on truth. When you no longer play roles, you become real. When you stop striving to be loved, you begin to love naturally. And when you no longer fear being misunderstood, you start living in harmony with your true frequency. This is the moment when kindness evolves into clarity. You realize empathy does not mean self-destruction, and love does not require your disappearance. You can feel for others without carrying their pain, help without losing yourself. When you understand this, the energy you once scattered outward begins to return powerful, clear, and serene. Jung once wrote, "There is no rebirth without the death of illusion." This stage is that death, the death of the good person image you once built. But behind that collapse, something new is forming, a being who knows how to love, how to feel, and how to stop. This is when you begin to grasp the true meaning of inner sovereignty. No one can define you anymore. No gaze can control your emotions. No compliment can make you forget your worth. You have walked through the fire of dissolution and found yourself in the ashes of old roles. From here, your compassion will no longer be a reflex, but a conscious choice, quiet, strong, and completely free. Moment 3. The recognition of fundamental aloneness, when no one can step inside you, after the soul has passed through the awakening shock and the dissolution of the self. The empath often reaches a deeper layer where silence is no longer a choice but a reality. This is the moment Jung called the recognition of fundamental aloneness, the realization of the soul's absolute solitude. It is not loneliness in the social sense, but a profound awareness that no one, no matter how deeply they love you, can ever truly enter your inner world. This moment doesn't come with tears, but with stillness. You sit across from a loved one, a partner, a friend, a confidant, and realize there is still an unbridgeable distance between two minds. They are listening. They care. And yet, your words fall into silence. Not because they are indifferent, but because they simply cannot feel the way you feel. And that's when you understand. The absolute understanding you've always sought does not exist. For the empath, this realization is a spiritual earthquake. You've lived your whole life believing that connection is salvation, that if you are sincere enough, empathetic enough, patient enough, you can reach another soul. But now you see that every soul is a sealed universe, a private cosmos of memories, wounds, and dreams no one else can fully enter. The more you awaken, the more visible this distance becomes. Jung once wrote, "The more one becomes conscious, the more one feels alone. The more awake you become, the more you perceive the natural isolation of consciousness. As your awareness expands and your perception deepens, you begin to see layers of unconsciousness that most people still live within. The paradox is this: awakening brings you closer to truth, but further from the crowd. At first, you resist this truth. You search for someone who can understand you, a soulmate, a spiritual teacher, a perfect mirror. But no matter how close someone comes, there is always a moment when you feel the gap between your inner worlds cannot be crossed. Each person is their own universe, shaped by experience, memory, shadow, and dreams, known only to them. If you fail to understand this, you fall into one of the two traps Jung warned about. The first is despair, retreating into isolation, believing no one is genuine, that loneliness is destiny. The second is addiction, constantly seeking the one who will fully understand you, mistaking intensity for connection. Both are escapes. One hides in solitude, the other hides in illusion. But if you are conscious enough to stay with this aloneness, to simply be in it without resistance, you begin to glimpse what Jung called the paradox of consciousness. You realize we are utterly alone within our awareness, and yet we can still connect, not through fusion, but through presence, not through total understanding, but through mutual acceptance that we will never fully understand each other. This is the moment of spiritual maturity for the empath. When you accept that no one can ever see you completely, you stop performing. When you no longer expect others to understand everything, you begin to speak truthfully. When you stop fearing solitude, you finally learn how to love without clinging. Jung saw this as a sacred initiation, the initiation into self-companionship. He wrote that a person becomes truly free only when they become a friend to their own soul. When you start enjoying your own company, not because you dislike people, but because you find peace in your own presence, you enter a new state of being. During this stage, many empaths experience a new kind of silence, not emptiness, but inner space. You begin to observe emotions without identifying with them. You listen to your thoughts without rushing to react. You no longer need validation. You learn that understanding from others is a gift, not an entitlement. Jung called this the art of self-witnessing. You become the observer of your soul rather than the fugitive of your loneliness. You start conversing with your inner self like an old friend. How am I feeling today? What hurts? Can I hold myself through this? And in doing so, loneliness transforms from an enemy into a sanctuary. The truth is, most of an empath's pain doesn't come from being unloved, but from wanting to be completely understood. Yet complete understanding is impossible, for human language and consciousness are inherently limited. When you accept this, you stop seeking perfect empathy and start cherishing imperfect connection. A touch, a glance, a shared silence, these small gestures become sacred because you no longer demand perfection from them. This is the stage Jung described as when the soul begins to walk parallel with the world instead of dissolving into it. You do not abandon humanity. You simply stop expecting it to mirror your soul. You live among others without being absorbed by them. You love and listen, but you no longer lose your center. You become, as Jung might say, a solitary traveler among souls, close yet free. From this state emerges a different kind of love, conscious love. It doesn't seek to save, to be repaid, or to be understood. It simply exists, like light streaming through a window, touching, but never invading. When you love this way, you stop looking for a half to complete you, and instead find a companion to walk beside you, not to fill your emptiness, but to illuminate your own path. Jung wrote in Mysterium Conjunctionis, "The greatest paradox of love is that it unites two beings without erasing their separateness. And it is precisely this recognition of aloneness that allows the empath to understand it. Solitude is no longer a sentence, it becomes a doorway to spiritual sovereignty. When you can be alone without feeling empty, love without possession, and understand without needing reciprocity, you reach a freedom Jung called individuation fulfilled. From this point on, the empath no longer seeks validation from the world, but becomes their own source of light. They understand that true connection is not found in merging, but in standing whole within one's separateness. They no longer fear solitude, for they realize solitude is the purest form of consciousness. When you reach this point, you no longer need the world to see you, because you finally see yourself. And in that moment, Jung's paradox becomes real. You are alone, yet never lonely. For in the deepest silence, you discover you were never truly alone at all. Moment 4. The reclamation of the soul. When you no longer need to rescue, after the soul has faced its fundamental aloneness, a new phase begins, quieter, deeper, harder to name. This is when you start calling back the energy you scattered through years of living for others. Jung called it the return of the soul, the coming home of the psyche after a long season of dispersion. If the previous 3 moments were about breaking down, this one is about restructuring. It's no longer explosive pain, but a silent process that demands steadiness and inner discipline. Having realized that no one can fully understand you and that your former persona has dissolved, you now learn a skill the world never taught you: living as a sovereign soul. At this stage, the empath no longer tries to give in order to be loved, nor to withdraw in order to feel safe. You begin to see what Jung emphasized. No one is saved by fleeing their own darkness. Likewise, you cannot save others by carrying their emotional karma. When this lands, you begin to let go not from indifference, but from a clear respect for freedom's limits. Reclamation begins when you stop chasing your old roles. You used to be the listener, the fixer, the one who always showed up. Now you choose conscious presence. You still love and help, but no longer wear compassion as a mask. You give without proving, and when you're tired, you stop. In the old world, that's called selfish. In Jung's language, it's spiritual self-governance. A strange quiet settles in. You no longer seek crowds to feel that you exist. You discover that the fewer people who understand you, the freer you are. Some think you're becoming distant, but in truth, you're returning. The soul can be whole only when it is no longer pulled by tangled cords of sentiment, half love, half duty. Something new happens. You sense other people's energy as waves, but instead of absorbing, you observe. You're no longer pulled into the dramas of pain and conflict around you. You clearly see those who prefer to remain in their hurt, and you allow them that choice, knowing every soul has its own timing for healing. Jung called this detached compassion, differentiated love. It is the most mature form of care, seeing pain without making it yours. You can empathize without rescuing, listen without carrying. Then your love becomes transparent, free of stickiness, manipulation, or hidden agendas. Reclamation also exposes where your energy once leaked. Relationships built on guilt, promises made from fear of abandonment, all the yeses you gave to keep the peace. Now, when such moments arise, you don't react, you see. And seeing is already healing. As Jung said, what is brought into the light of consciousness loses its destructive power. You also meet what many call the stillness after the storm. There are no fireworks, no fights, but neither is there the high of playing savior. At first, this peace feels confusing, even empty. Gradually, you realize it isn't emptiness. It's the pure space the soul needs to regenerate. From here, your life changes in quality. You stop hunting for a grand purpose out there. Things become simple. Brewing tea, tending a plant, sitting in morning light, doing nothing. You discover that peace is not a reward for effort, but the natural result when your energy returns to its rightful home. In memories, dreams, reflections, Jung recalls regaining balance after crisis by building his lakeside retreat near Zurich, hewing stone, lighting fires, keeping a journal. Nothing grand. He lived as if life itself were a ritual, and through that his awareness re-knit itself. For the empath, this moment is similar. You slow down, become present, and find the sacred inside the ordinary. As scattered energy returns, clarity arrives. Complicated relationships become legible. No one is the villain, they're simply living at a different level of awareness. You don't need to forgive or forget, because you are no longer bound. Forgiveness ceases to be a moral performance and becomes a natural outcome of restored equilibrium. Many empaths now develop a deep-tier intuition, not only reading others, but reading themselves. You stop asking, "What do they think of me?" and begin asking, "What am I actually feeling in this body?" You trust your quiet more than the world's advice. Reclamation renders everything transparent. You, others, relationships, aims. Each thing takes its place. No grasping, no pushing. You stop seeking balance because you have become it. And precisely when you no longer need to save anyone, you finally become someone who can truly help. Jung said, "The wounded healer is not the one who heals others, but the one who has learned to live with his wound consciously." That is the essence of the fourth moment. The union of light and shadow. You no longer deny pain, but you no longer are the pain. You understand that true light never erases darkness, it gives it outline. Then the whole of your path comes into view, not as a chain of mistakes, but as the metamorphosis of consciousness. Moment 5. Integration. When compassion becomes wisdom, once the soul has returned and your energy is reclaimed, the empath's journey arrives at its final threshold, what Jung called integration. This is no longer mere healing, but incarnation. The once fragmented parts begin to unite, light with shadow, kindness with limits, wounds with wisdom. If the first 3 moments were collapse and the fourth was reconstruction, the fifth is the soul's alchemy, compassion tempered by awareness, pure, steady, and deliberate. You are no longer the one who believed love means endurance, nor the one who closed down to avoid harm. You stand in the center where love is no longer a reflex, but a choice. That choice flows from wisdom, not fear of loss or hunger to be understood. Jung called this tempered empathy compassion that has been forged. Here, you no longer try to empathize with everyone. You stop scanning and decoding every room. Instead, you choose where to place your heart. You understand empathy cannot reach souls that are not ready, and love cannot flourish in environments without awareness. This is the summit Jung associated with consciousness, conscious limitation. As integration settles in, old triggers lose their power. You can hear criticism, perceive the motive, and still remain unmoved. You don't need to win or prove. You simply see, that is them. This is me. The stance isn't judgment, it's clarity, a mind no longer confused between me and the other. Jung wrote, "Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off the dark parts, but by illuminating them with consciousness." Embracing this, you stop warring with your inner night. You see the hurt, the fear, the need to be seen, and you smile at them like children who once lost their way. Strength no longer means control, it means capacity to contain. Those who reach this phase often grow remarkably quiet. They don't talk much about healing or spiritual growth. They simply live, simply, honestly, presently. Their energy is no longer fiery, but warm even, and enduring. When they enter a room, the atmosphere shifts, not because they push out good vibes, but because they emit no inner chaos. They are balanced. This is when the true nature of the healer becomes clear, not one who fixes others, but one reconciled to themselves. Jung called them the wounded healer bearing wounds that no longer rule them. The wound becomes a doorway into deeper human understanding, and you become a quiet mirror for those still frantic on their path. Spiritually, this is entry into unity consciousness. You stop seeing through the lens of separation. You recognize that so-called good and evil, light and dark, are poles of the same current. What torments us is not the poles themselves, but our refusal to hold the whole. Now, compassion does not exclude. It perceives both the aggressor and the afflicted as roles within the same play of evolution. But unlike before, you do not feel for them instead of them. You simply see them with knowing, not with borrowed pain. From this state arises a new quality, the humility of the awakened. You no longer think yourself above for understanding, nor others below for not yet seeing. Everyone is on a path. The only difference is degree of awareness. So you stop preaching, persuading, spreading light. True light needs no promotion, only presence. Integration brings a distinctive peace, unconditional peace. It doesn't come from circumstance, success, or recognition, but from no longer resisting life. Events cease to be labeled good or bad. They are movements of consciousness, and you witness them knowing you are no longer caught in the role.